When my son stopped calling me, I did not complain. I told myself that married life is busy. I told myself that love changes shape with time. But deep inside, something felt wrong. A quiet feeling that sat in my chest and did not leave. I remember the exact morning when this feeling became heavy. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, the same one I had owned for years. The kettle was boiling, making that soft sound I knew so well. I reached for my phone, as I did every morning. No missed calls, no messages. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Then I smiled and whispered to myself, "He must be busy." That is how this story begins. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with a mother learning how silence can hurt more than words. I was never a woman with big dreams for myself. My dreams were simple: a safe home, a peaceful heart, and a child who grew up kind. My husband and I were not rich, but we were content. We laughed easily. We shared our worries quietly at night. When he passed away, my world became smaller. Suddenly, there was only my son and me. I still remember holding my son's small hand at the funeral. His fingers were cold. Mine were shaking. I leaned down and whispered, "It's just us now." And it was. From that day on, every breath I took was for him. Every decision I made was for him. I did not think of it as sacrifice. It was love. I woke up early and slept late. I worked where I could, sometimes cleaning homes, sometimes sewing clothes for neighbors. At night, when he slept, I would sit beside his bed. I watched his chest rise and fall, and I prayed quietly, "Please let him be happy." As he grew older, he became my friend. He told me about school, about teachers he liked and teachers he feared. When he failed his first exam, he cried in my lap. I did not scold him. I just held him. I said, "One paper cannot decide your future." When he passed the next one, he ran home smiling. He lifted me off the ground. "Mom, I did it." I laughed so hard that day. We did not have much, but our home felt full of small talks, full of shared meals, full of comfort. He used to call my name from another room just to hear my voice. Sometimes he had nothing to say. He just wanted to know I was there. When he told me he wanted to marry, my heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from the knowledge that life was changing. I looked at his face and saw excitement, hope. I smiled. I said, "If she makes you happy, I will welcome her." And I meant it. On the day of his wedding, I stood quietly to the side. I watched him smile at his bride. I wiped my tears before anyone could see them. They were not tears of loss. They were tears of transition. I told myself, my role is changing, not ending. I did not want to be the kind of mother who controls. I wanted to be gentle, respectful. After the wedding, the house felt empty, too quiet. His room stayed the same for weeks, his shoes still by the door. I did not touch anything. I needed time. In the beginning, he called often. He told me about their new home, about their routines. I listened carefully. I was happy for him. Sometimes I visited them. I brought homemade food. I tried not to stay long. I wanted them to have space. His wife was polite. She thanked me for the food. She smiled when I spoke. I respected her boundaries. I did not ask questions. I did not give advice unless asked. I believed this was the right way. But slowly, things began to change. The calls became shorter, then fewer. When I called, he sounded distracted. His answers felt rushed. "I'll call you later, Mom." Later became tomorrow. Tomorrow became never. When I visited, I noticed he spent more time on his phone. Our conversations felt forced. I would sit on the sofa, hands folded, waiting for the right moment to speak. Sometimes that moment never came. I began to feel like a stranger in my son's home. At night, back in my own house, I replayed every word, every pause. I wondered if I had done something wrong. Mothers often blame themselves first. I stopped calling so often. I did not want to be a burden. I told myself, he will call when he has time. Days passed, then weeks. Festivals came and went. I celebrated alone. I cooked small meals. I set one plate instead of two.
I told myself this was normal, that this was adulthood. But deep inside, the loneliness grew. It was not loud. It did not scream. It sat quietly beside me.
Silence does not arrive suddenly. It walks in slowly, like a guest who does not announce themselves. At first, you hardly notice. Then one day, you realize they have taken a seat in your life. After I stopped calling so often, I waited. Not openly, quietly. Every morning, I still checked my phone. Not with excitement anymore, but with habit. The same habit I had built over years of being a mother. I told myself I was being mature. I told myself I was respecting his space. But deep inside, I was afraid. Afraid that if I called too much, I would push him further away. Afraid that my voice would sound unwanted. So I stayed quiet. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Life around me continued. Neighbors came and went. Children played outside. Laughter floated through the air. But inside my home, time felt slow, heavy. I began to notice how empty the rooms felt, not because furniture was missing, but because memories were too loud. Every corner reminded me of him. The kitchen where he used to sneak food late at night. The hallway where he practiced walking for his school events. The chair where he sat and talked to me for hours. I cleaned often, not because the house was dirty, but because cleaning kept my hands busy. When your hands are busy, your heart gets a little rest. One afternoon, I gathered courage and went to visit them. I did not call ahead. I thought it would be a small surprise. I stood outside their door, holding a bag of homemade food. Food he loved as a child. I rang the bell. His wife opened the door. She smiled politely. "Oh, you're here," she said. Not happily, not warmly, just politely. I stepped inside slowly. The house looked nice, clean, organized, but it did not feel welcoming. My son came out of the room, phone in hand. He looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't tell us you were coming," he said. His tone was not angry, but it was not gentle either. I smiled quickly. I was nearby, I lied. We sat together for a short while. The conversation stayed light, almost shallow. No deep talk, no real connection. I noticed how his wife kept checking the time, how my son kept glancing at his phone. I felt like I was interrupting something important, even though once I was his whole world. I did not stay long. As I stood to leave, I handed him the food. "I made this for you." He took it and nodded. "Thanks, Mom." No hug, no pause. I walked home slowly that day. My steps felt heavier than usual. That night, I could not sleep. My mind replayed the visit again and again. I asked myself questions that had no answers. Was I too present before? Was I too loving? Did I make him uncomfortable without knowing? A mother's heart searches for blame, even when there is none. I remembered how my own mother had lived with us after marriage, how she was part of everything. Times were different then. Families were different. Now, independence is praised. Distance is called respect. I wondered where mothers fit in this new world. On a quiet evening, I decided to go through old photos. The ones kept in a small box under my bed. I sat on the floor and opened it. There he was, as a baby, as a toddler, as a schoolboy. Every picture told a story. Every smile reminded me of a bond that once felt unbreakable. I held one photo for a long time. It was from his graduation day. He had wrapped his arm around me, proud, confident. That was the day he said, "Everything I am is because of you." I did not cry then. I smiled. That memory kept me warm for years. But that night, tears came quietly. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a few drops falling on an old photograph. The hardest moments were during special days. Birthdays, festivals. I would wake up early hoping my phone would ring. I would dress nicely just in case. Sometimes the call came late.
sometimes it did not come at all. When it did, it felt rushed. "Happy birthday, Mom. I'll talk later." Later never came. I learned how to smile through disappointment. I learned how to pretend everything was fine, because complaining felt useless. One evening, I gathered courage again and called him. Not to accuse, not to complain, just to talk. He answered after a few rings. "Yes, Mom?" I paused before speaking. I didn't want my voice to shake. "I just wanted to hear you," I said softly. There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "I'm a bit busy right now." I replied, "That's okay," and I hung up. That call stayed with me for days, because in that moment I felt something break. Not loudly, but deeply. I finally understood that I was no longer a priority. This realization did not make me angry. It made me tired. Tired of waiting, tired of hoping, tired of feeling invisible. I began to pull back. Not to punish him, but to protect myself. I stopped arranging my day around his possible calls. I stopped cooking his favorite meals on festivals. I started eating what I liked, doing what brought me peace. Small steps, quiet changes.
Distance changes people quietly. You do not notice it at first, but one day you realize you are no longer standing in the same place. After I began pulling back, my days became slower, not empty, just different. I woke up without checking my phone right away. I made tea and sat by the window. I watched the street come alive. People had their own routines, their own worries, their own joys. I reminded myself that my son now had his own life too, and that was not wrong. But some nights the loneliness returned. It sat beside me in the quiet room, not to hurt me, just to remind me of what once was. I stopped visiting unless invited. Weeks passed without an invitation. I told myself this was respect, but it felt like absence. One day I felt sick. Nothing serious, just weakness and fever. I lay in bed, wrapped in an old blanket. The house felt colder than usual. I thought about calling my son. I even picked up the phone. Then I put it back down. I did not want to disturb him. That thought surprised me, because once my pain was his concern. A neighbor came by with soup. She asked gently, "Did you tell your son?" I smiled and said, "He's busy." The words came easily now. A few days later, my son called. His voice sounded rushed as always. "Mom, I heard you weren't well," he said. I paused. "I'm better now," I replied. There was a short silence. "That's good," he said. And then, "I have to go." The call ended. I stared at the phone for a long time. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not pain, not anger. Acceptance. I realized he no longer knew how to sit with my feelings, and maybe I no longer knew how to ask. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I received a message. It was from my daughter-in-law. She asked if I could come over the next day. She said they needed to talk. My heart began to beat faster, not from excitement, from fear. I did not sleep well that night. My mind imagined many things. Had I done something wrong? Was I about to hear something painful? In the morning, I dressed carefully. I chose simple clothes. I tied my hair neatly. I wanted to look calm, even if I was not. When I reached their home, everything looked the same, but it felt different. They sat across from me at the table. My son looked uncomfortable. His wife looked serious. She spoke first. She said they needed more space, that visits should be planned, that they were trying to build their own routine. Her words were polite, but firm. I listened quietly. I did not interrupt. Then my son spoke. "Mom," he said, "we hope you understand." I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was familiar, but his eyes felt distant. In that moment, many things became clear. I was not being pushed away with anger. I was being pushed away with careful words, and that somehow hurt more. I nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. My voice did not shake. We talked a little more, about schedules, about calls. Everything sounded organized, controlled. There was no space for feelings. When I stood up to leave, my son hesitated. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he did not. I walked out with a calm face, but my heart felt heavy.
On the way home, I did not cry. I thought about my life. I thought about how motherhood changes shape, how a mother must learn when to step back, even when her heart wants to stay close. That conversation did not break me. It freed me, because I finally understood my place, not at the center of his life anymore, but somewhere on the edge, and I had a choice, to stand there waiting, or to step forward into my own life again. That evening, I cleaned the house slowly. I opened windows. I let fresh air in. I took out all clothes I no longer wore, old items I no longer needed. Letting go began with small things. I cooked a simple meal for myself. I ate without rushing. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I was waiting for something.
After that conversation, my days became quieter in a different way. Not the heavy silence of waiting, but the calm silence of acceptance. I did not expect anything anymore, and because of that, I began to breathe easier. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made tea and sat near the window. I watched the sunlight move across the floor. I listened to the sounds of the street. Life was still happening around me, and slowly I allowed it to happen inside me too. I began doing things I had once stopped doing, small things, simple things. I visited an old friend from the neighborhood. We talked about the past. We laughed about things that no longer mattered. I started walking in the evenings, just around the block, feeling the air on my face. For years, my world had been centered around one person. Now it was expanding again. At first it felt strange, almost wrong. Mothers are taught that their happiness comes last, that putting themselves first is selfish. But I was learning something new. Caring for myself did not mean I loved my son less. It meant I was finally loving myself too. Weeks passed, then months. My son and I spoke less often, but when we did, the conversations felt calmer. No expectations, no hidden sadness. Sometimes he called, sometimes I did. We spoke about simple things: work, weather, health. There were still no long talks like before, but there was peace. I stopped measuring love by how often he called. I stopped counting days. I learned to let moments come naturally. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. My son came to visit me. He did not call first. He just arrived. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, my heart skipped. But I did not rush. I did not ask questions. I simply said, "Come in." He sat down quietly. The house felt different with him in it. Familiar, yet distant. We sat for a while without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. Then he looked at me and said, "Mom, you seem different." I smiled softly. "I feel different," I replied. He nodded slowly. After a pause, he spoke again. "I didn't realize how quiet things became," he said. I did not interrupt him. "I thought you were fine," he continued. "You never complained." I looked at him gently. "I didn't want to add weight to your life," I said. He lowered his eyes. That moment was important. Not because everything was fixed, but because something was finally being seen. He stayed for tea, just like old times. We talked about small memories, moments from his childhood. He smiled when I reminded him of things he had forgotten. Before leaving, he stood near the door. He hesitated. Then he said, "I'm sorry if I made you feel alone." His voice was quiet, sincere. I nodded. "I know life changes," I said. "I just needed time to understand it too." We did not hug for long, just a brief moment. But it felt real. After he left, I sat down slowly. My heart felt full. Not because everything was perfect, but because honesty had entered the room. I realized something important that day. Children do not always know the weight of their silence, not because they do not care, but because they are learning their own lives. And mothers must learn how to speak, without holding guilt in their voices. That evening, I wrote a letter, not to send, just to release my thoughts. I wrote about my fears, my mistakes, my love. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Some words are not meant to be delivered. They are meant to be understood by the heart. Time has a way of softening sharp edges. Not quickly, not loudly, but gently, day by day. After my son's visit, I did not expect more. I did not wait for regular calls. I did not plan conversations in my head. I simply let life move. And something surprising happened. Because I stopped reaching, he began to come closer. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just naturally. He started calling once in a while, sometimes to ask about my health, sometimes just to talk for a few minutes. The calls were still short, but they were warmer. I could hear it in his voice. Less rush, less distance. I learned to meet him where he was, not where I wished he would be. That made all the difference. I also began to understand my daughter-in-law better. I saw that she was not trying to replace me. She was trying to protect her own space. Once, when my son was not around, she called me herself. She asked for a recipe. It was a small thing, but it meant something. We talked about cooking, about daily life. No tension, no past weight. I realized then that sometimes silence is not dislike. Sometimes it is fear of doing something wrong, just like me. I stopped seeing myself as forgotten and started seeing myself as repositioned. I was no longer at the center of my son's world, but I was still part of it. That truth hurt at first, but later it felt freeing, because the center of my own world could now be me. I joined a small community group nearby. Nothing big, just people my age sharing tea and conversation. We talked about life, about children, about growing older. I realized I was not alone in my feelings. Many mothers carried the same quiet sadness. Sharing it made it lighter. One evening, my son came again, this time with his wife. They stayed for dinner, simple food, simple talk. At the table, there was no tension, just calm presence. Before leaving, my daughter-in-law hugged me. It surprised us both. She said softly, "Thank you for understanding." I smiled and replied, "We are all learning." That night, I sat alone again, but it felt different. The loneliness was gone. In its place was peace. I understood something deeply then. A mother's love does not end when her child grows. It changes shape, and if we allow it to change, it can become something strong, something calm, something lasting. I no longer wait by the phone. I no longer measure love in calls or visits. I measure it in respect, in honesty, in quiet moments of connection.